It's my great pleasure to welcome Yuhan Wu from the University of Manchester to us. Yuhan is a PhD researcher at the School of Environment, Education and Development, or SEED, at the University of Manchester. Her research explores teachers' perceptions of the boy crisis, focusing on gender stereotypes, gendered discourse, and their broader implications for gender equity in Chinese education. So, Yuhan, many thanks and welcome, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Richard. Hello, everyone. My name is Yuhan Wu, and I'm currently a third-year PhD student in education. And my research mainly focuses on gender issues in education, particularly the phenomenon of boy crisis, or in other terms, the failing boys or boys underachievement. And in today's presentation, I'll first provide a brief introduction of how similar concerns have been studied both worldwide and in China. And then I will introduce my own research and share with you some of the key themes I got from my findings. So, can I just share my... okay, so, yeah, you all see that?
Yes, that's working.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. So, so the boys' underachievement caught the attention of educators in many countries at the end of last century. And many began to examine why boys seemed to be falling behind girls academically and what was inhibiting boys' masculinity. And around 2010, similar academic discussions appeared in China under the name of boy crisis. And so this concept of boy crisis actually covered many aspects of boys' academic performance as well as any other comprehensive abilities. And to start with, I would like to talk about how it was observed worldwide. And so at the end of last century, many Western countries observed that boys are falling behind girls in many subjects. For example, in the UK, studies have found that girls' performance in math and science at GCSE caught up with and surpassed that of boys in the mid-1990s. And the Progress in International Reading Literacy study in 2006 found that girls performed better than boys in reading in the vast majority of countries. And Christina Hoff Summers, who is leading exponent of the saying of the failing boys, found that boys are lagging behind girls in terms of graduation rates, and that boys' academic performance remains more polarized. However, there are also voices questioning this data. For example, there are scholars suggesting that this data is not absolute and that girls perform less well than boys on the SAT in mathematics. And American Association of University Women argues that boys are not in great distress because the proportion of male high school and college graduates has been increasing. However, the fear that boys are facing crisis is not stopped by those doubts and debates, and the media and scholars are constantly enriching the discussion around the failing boys. Some scholars attribute this to biological differences. They argue that boys' brain structures make them naturally less suited for tasks like verbal reasoning, but better at spatial and physical activities. And others claim that this should be related to like the education system. The educational system was feminized because there are more female teachers than male teachers, and female teachers' teaching style is believed to be not conducive to boys' development. And critics question these arguments. They point out that this is essentialism. The essentialism ignores the role of social and cultural influences on students' behavior. And most importantly, the claims, such as the feminization of the teaching environment, are to blame for boys' academic crisis, are questionable. This assertion assumes that all male teachers are using the same set of teaching methods and that there seems to be a uniform set of behavioral norms for the male population, and that only male teachers are able to identify the strength of boys. And this emphasizes that differences between the opposite sex and the homogeneity of the same sex are natural, inevitable, but ignores the diversity of teachers' approaches and the differences between individual students. And those teachers against these sayings, they believe that male teachers aren't the only ones who can serve as role models for boys, and gender identity doesn't depend solely on teachers' gender. And in addition, this oversimplification overlooks the diversity among boys and men when it comes to factors like class, sexuality, race, ethnicity, where they live, or whether they have disabilities. It ignores how these factors can shape their experiences differently. And also, scholars have suggested that blaming the female groups for boy crisis, for example, the sayings that female teachers inhibit boys' development or girls' academic success highlights boys' failure. These sayings reflect a misogynistic ideology or a backlash against feminism. And framing boys as victims of feminist development is to exaggerate and misread the progress that feminism has made for women's educational status. And positioning male and female students in a competitive binary, as if gains for girls means losses for boys, often reflects anxiety about feminism changing the traditional male-centered order in society. And also, there are scholars who try to explain the reasons behind this backlash and the moral panic. Because the job market has evolved, the demand for male-dominated manual labor has declined. And at the same time, the growing service industry places more value on the communication and emotional skills, which are often associated with women. So more women are becoming men's competitors. These had led to a backlash against feminism and concerns about the future performance of boys in the workplace who were academically underperforming. And the media quickly captures the attention of the public by creating a bizarre atmosphere of exaggeration and simplifying the complex issues of gender and education to a contest between men and women, and describing boys as the poor victims of modern education. The narrative of underachieving boys, with its many unresolved contradictions, spread through the educational community and wider society, and finally create this moral panic. Okay, and the final bit about the research worldwide is about the laddish culture. This is a prevalent culture among boys, and the two main characteristics are anti-learning and fear of femininity. And in fact, these two things are closely connected, because many boys refuse to make the effort to study just because they believe that reading carefully and studying quietly is a feminine act that boys should not do. And especially boys who strongly believe in the gendered ideas conveyed by the laddish culture also show a fear of failure, because not all boys are at the top of their class. So some underachieving boys choose to deliberately not take their studies seriously. And they use the excuse of being a cool boy to explain the academic failure. And this culture and mindset have been criticized by many scholars and educators, because they argue that it not only contributes to more boys falling academically, but also reinforces strict gender roles. And that's basically the situation about how the failing boys will study in other countries. Then how about China? How this boy crisis is understood in the Chinese context. So similarly, Chinese society and media also paid attention to the phenomenon of boy crisis. We can see from those media reports, as well as the Ministry of Education's response to a proposal by representatives of the National People's Congress regarding preventing the feminization of male adolescents. I also want to mention that the word feminization was carefully avoided in the response, and instead the emphasis was placed on strengthening physical education as a promising direction for improvement. Okay, so there's a basic timeline for the research about boy crisis in China. So the discussions on the topic of gender advantages and disadvantages in education in China emerged around like in early 2000s. And some scholars use the term girls' advantage to describe the phenomenon that girls outperform boys in primary and secondary school. And they argue that this is because girls are more focused, obedient, self-motivated, patient, and they have better memory and language skills than boys. And they're better adapted to educational assessment patterns that test patience and memory. And then the term girls' advantages was soon replaced by terms such as boys' disadvantages, boys' weaknesses. And this batch of scholars not only repeated the earlier claims that boys were falling behind academically, they also shifted some attention to boys' behavior. So they describe boys as weak, timid, petty, seeing these traits as evidence of a lack of masculinity. And to address this, they called for more male teachers to be recruited in schools, and they hoped that they could serve as role models for boys. And these two arguments combined to form the prototype of a future boy crisis theory. And in 2010, the book Saving the Boys, which is here, was published. And the discussion about boys' educational disadvantages finally got the official name of boy crisis. And compared with the relatively neutral views of scholars in early 2000s, the supporters of the saying of boy crisis around 2010 showed a more obvious tendency that boys are the victims of modern education. And here's some data shown in the book about how boys are falling behind girls in all stages. So again, some scholars questioned the validity of these data. For example, the top students in the college entrance examination cannot provide a complete picture of the academic performance of the entire gender group. And university scholarships are only one aspect of university life. So it also cannot prove that boys are, according to the book, overwhelmed and outperformed by female students throughout the university years. But the authors of the book responded to those questions, that boys are already in a crisis situation and that educators should be alert and intervene early rather than wait until the situation becomes more serious. And although there are controversies, many scholars still argue that boys are facing significant academic difficulties and that this plight is believed to be caused by the combination of boys' innate biological conditions and an unsupportive external educational environment. That's quite similar to the discussion in the boys' underachievement research worldwide, like I've mentioned in the previous part. So here in China, again, boys are described as lively and active thinkers who are good at hands-on practice and are bold in exploration. But the current school education always seems to be against boys. The teaching process depends on extensive verbal indoctrination, and the assessment methods focus on memory and language ability, and the campus management emphasizes absolute discipline and obedience. These models are believed to be more conducive to quiet and obedient girls who are good at reciting, where the more open-minded, unconventional boys are not compatible with this system. So their strengths are not highlighted, but their weaknesses are particularly pronounced. And this academic lag is preventing many boys from obtaining an outstanding qualification. So they face greater mental stress, increased psychological problems, and also difficulties in finding good jobs after graduation. And in response to these claims, some Chinese scholars criticize this essentialism of the arguments, and others accuse that the boy crisis discourse exaggerates the disadvantages of boys, but deliberately ignores the greater challenges girls face in education and employment. There were studies point out that there's still a large number of out-of-school girls in rural China who either do not attend school at all or drop out early to work due to the limited family resources and a patriarchal family culture that prefer sons over daughters. And even if some girls surpass boys academically after entering the education system, they still face structural oppression. Female-dominated majors in universities, some of them will lower the admission standards for male students. But the male-dominated majors are not that welcoming to female students. And after graduation, girls' academic advantages do not necessarily translate into employment advantages. And they always suffer more gender discrimination and have lower average wages and fewer promotion opportunities than men. And also, there were discussion about the dominance of women in the teaching profession in China. Some scholars argue that female teachers are gentle and conscientious, but are not good at stimulating students' creative and critical thinking, and that the teaching style is more suited to the learning habits of girls rather than boys. And so again, these arguments raised questions from opponents. There are already many Chinese and international studies that show that teachers' gender does not have a significant impact on student learning outcomes. And also, some scholars argue that the main reason for the concentration for women in the teaching profession is because of the fixed holidays and stable working environment. All these are aligned with traditional gender roles, which expect women to take on more family responsibilities. But this comes at the cost of lower income. And okay, so I also want to talk about a really important discussion around boy crisis. This involves masculinity crisis. So some scholars believe that nowadays Chinese boys are losing their masculine qualities, losing positive mindset, and they seem to fail to display brave and strong characters. And they often speak with a so-called feminine tone or behave in a so-called feminine manner. And some scholars even endorse the saying that if the boys are effeminate, so is the nation, which is a modified version of if the young are strong, so is the nation, which is by a really famous Chinese modern educator. And also the physical health of boys is a concern. The lack of a strong physique is also seen as a classic sign of inadequate masculinity. And according to authors of the book, Saving the Boys, Chinese boys' health status continued to deteriorate, and there's also a declining trend in performance in various sports. And in terms of the masculinity crisis, some scholars once again blamed a high proportion of female teachers in schools. And also some of them mentioned about the absence of fathers in family education. Some point out that fathers play a crucial role in helping boys to control their emotions and to develop a sense of rules. But in many families, fathers are unaware of their important responsibilities in educating their children. And other scholars also argue that the emergence of androgynous male images in popular culture has influenced the aesthetics of young people. They view the male celebrities with this so-called feminized appearance and temperament as attention-seeking or unable to endure hardship. And they criticize the young people who admire such celebrities as blindly following trends. And correspondingly, those scholars offered some suggestions to the situation. They encourage greater father involvement in family education and suggest that the media promote the so-called mainstream gender values. And in the school environment, the concept of teaching according to gender was mentioned. So according to these suggestions, school education should emphasize comprehensive education for boys, including manual skills, training for masculine qualities, physical fitness, and sense of social responsibility. And scholars who are against those arguments point out that a so-called boy crisis is actually a crisis of traditional gender views. They believe that what needs to be changed is not the effeminate boys, but the gender stereotypes that some educators hold on to. The unmanly boys and womanly girls actually have positive implications. These representations can challenge the traditional gender stereotypes, and allowing boys to express more delicate and genuine emotions can help alleviate the burdens, enable them to show their true selves to a greater extent. And regarding to the androgynous images in popular culture, some scholars refer to Connell's theory of masculinities. stating that boys' gender qualities are diverse and there should not be hierarchical ranking among different masculine qualities. And they believe that the society that restricts boys from expressing themselves, looks down on non-traditional masculine traits and treats the non-conforming boys as problems. This kind of society is the one that actually needs saving. Okay, and here I would also like to introduce some really important localized theories of Chinese masculinity. I think it's important to place the discussions of Chinese boys' masculinity crisis within China's cultural context. And two of the most influential localized theories in Chinese masculinity studies are Cam Lewis' Yuhan Wu system and Gong Song's yin-yang diet. So the yin-yang diet emphasizes that traditional Chinese masculinity was structured around power rather than gender. In this system, yin and yang do not strictly correspond to female and male. Instead, they represent positions within power relations, those with less power versus those with more. But this kind of categorization has been questioned for being too fluid because it doesn't provide a solid enough basis for studying male-specific gender roles. And the Yuhan Wu system divides masculinity into two types of core qualities. So the Wen refers to the mental or silver sphere with a focus on literary and cultural achievements. A Wu refers to the physical or martial sphere centered around strength, combat, and military power. And historically, in most periods of Chinese history, Wen was valued more highly than Wu. So men who engaged in intellectual and government work were seen as embodying a more ideal masculinity than those who relied on physical strength or military skills. Although the ideal was to achieve both Wen and Wu, a purely physical warrior-like masculinity was not the dominant aesthetic in China before the 20th century. However, as China entered the modern era, masculine ideals began to shift. The Yuhan Wu system can no longer fully capture the complexities of emerging this newer style masculinities. And I also want to mention that in the early 20th century, under the pressure to modernize and to shake off the label of the sick man of East Asia, Chinese students and intellectuals aimed to reconstruct the image of Chinese masculinity through a redefinition of the male body. So by the 1920s, a new masculine discourse emerged. The previously admired, scholarly, gentle image of male elites was now viewed as weak and outdated. Instead, a strong, healthy body became central to the new ideal of Chinese manhood. And this transformation left a deep and lasting impact on Chinese masculinity. And I think even today, the theme of patriotism continues to shape the cultural imagination of what an ideal man should be like. Okay, so this is basically the background of the previous studies. And there has already been wonderful researchers around this topic about boy crisis. And many of them used quantitative methods, relying on numerical data to explore the phenomenon. However, I believe that qualitative research focusing on the subjective feelings, perspectives of a certain group that is deeply involved in such phenomenon is equally important. So my goal is not to provide a definite or single explanation for the existence, causes, and consequences of boy crisis, or give an answer or direct answer to the question of do boys really need saving? Instead, I'm more curious about the wider discourse and underlying educational philosophies and gender ideology it reflects. So what I did was to conduct semi-structured interviews with 22 teachers teaching in primary and secondary schools in Beijing. And I explored their experiences and understandings of boy crisis. This study used a combination of snowball sampling and purposive sampling. So basically, the purpose of sampling was applied because I want a balance of my participants from both arts and science subjects. So according to the definition of the college entrance examination, the arts subjects mainly include history, geography, politics, and the science subjects include biology, chemistry, physics, and also with the mandatory compulsory 3 subjects, which are mathematics, Chinese language, and English. So these used to be the previous structure of the subjects set it for the college entrance examination. And this kind of categorization, this division of subjects, is still influencing how Chinese teachers evaluating students' ability. So that's why I want my participants to come from both arts and science subjects. And during the interview, I also used photo elicitation as another efficient tool to trigger participants' memories and to generate richer data. Because gender trait is a very important part of the interview. But it's difficult to rely on direct question to understand teachers' attitudes and personal preferences towards different types of masculinity and gender traits, how they interpret them. So I think the medium of photographs we can use to help participants find an entry point, and also can help to visualize the abstract definition of masculinity. During the interview, I presented 14 pictures to the participants and asked them to choose several pictures as the answer of questions relating to masculinity. For example, which pictures do you think best or least represent the types of masculinity that are most acceptable in Chinese society? And how about your own understanding? Why did you choose that picture? Such questions like that. And so in today's presentation, I'll also share some of the pictures with you. But because of the copyright issue, I can only show some of the AI regenerated version, but clearly you can see the original content from this version. And also, I want to mention that I plan to use feminist critical discourse analysis to analyze how gender stereotypes and the varying degrees of injustice these bring to both genders that permeate into and are sustained by teachers' gendered discourse, whether direct or subtle. And I used FCDA because it recognized that gender ideologies often appear natural and widely accepted rather than as form of domination. And through discourse, these ideologies are normalized and making inequalities seem legitimate and invisible. FCDA also emphasizes gender relationality. It focuses not only on interactions between men and women, but also on hierarchies within genders. It examines how masculinities are constructed in discourse and how these constructions can shape women's experiences. And importantly, FCDA also acknowledges that women can sometimes be complicit in perpetuating the male-centered discourse. So these principles align closely with my research. And the research questions are: what kinds of discursive practices do teachers and schools in China use when talking about boys in education? And how do these discursive practices reflect wider social discourses around boy crisis? And here are 4 themes that I would like to share with you. The 4 themes will all be in the forms like the naughty boy and the clever boy, the weak boy, and the charming boy. So I'll share with you some of the pictures I presented to the participants and some really interesting quotes around these topics. So the naughty boy is one of the most common stereotypes that appears in teachers' descriptions. Boys as a group are often portrayed as more playful, less disciplined, and more likely to break rules. And many teachers say that classes with more boys are harder to manage. And as students move into secondary school, these mischievous boys are not just noisy or active. They sometimes show more serious forms of aggression. And some teachers believe this is simply because of biology. In their view, boys have stronger tendencies toward violence due to higher levels of male hormones. That's quite similar to what we discussed in the previous part about in some literature, some scholars, they even also rely on the biological explanations. So I remember that I have this one biology teacher. She confidently referred to her subject knowledge and explained that during puberty, the hormones in boys are different from those in girls. And she even directly said that male hormones are basically violent in nature. And also, another typical viewpoint is that boys are late developers. For those teachers, once boys grow older and their development catches up, this naughty phase will naturally pass. And also, here's a really interesting quote from Miss Peng. She mentioned a student who she described as a typical little boy, and the kind of boy who walks around thinking, no one can beat me, and he never cares about rules and how others perceive him, always seeking conflict. Although she called these as an extreme case and described this little boy as there must be something wrong with him, she still framed his behavior as a representative of a general little boy pattern. And in her view, such behavior stem from biological impulses that boys themselves cannot control. And she also illustrated the gendered nature of violence by comparing what happens when boys hit girls versus when girls hit boys. Her conclusion was that due to the physical differences, boys tend to cause more serious harm. And that's why she used different terms to describe these actions. When a girl was violent, she called it a violent act. When a boy was violent, she called it a violent problem. So this choice of words reflects a deeper cultural distinction. The word problem definitely carries a much stronger negative connotation than act. It doesn't just point to the action itself, but to the consequences and the need for greater discipline or even punishment. And this comparison suggests that violence committed by boys is seen as not only more dangerous, but also more deserving of serious disciplinary actions. And at the same time, such essentialist thinking that boys are naturally more violent contributes to two effects. One is that it reinforces the stereotypes of boys as a constant source of concern for teachers. And at the same time, it also shows a level of tolerance and understanding. Because by linking their behavior to biological reasons, some teachers may be unintentionally normalizing the very behavior they find troubling. And apart from simply accepting and rationalizing boys' mischief, many teachers go a step further by assigning it with positive values. For example, some believe that being mischievous, being naughty, helps to develop flexible thinking. And they associate mischievous boys with intelligence and creativity. Others see these boys as essential to creating a lively classroom atmosphere. And in that case, they highlight the humorous and entertaining side of the concept of mischief. Some teachers also imagine future workplace scenarios. Traits that are often linked to mischievous behaviors like energetic, bold, and quick thinking are defined as valuable as formal academic credentials. So from this point of view, mischief becomes a sign of potential success in life beyond school. So finally, as a result, whether in terms of learning and social interaction, future career, mischievous boys are often given space to be interpreted in a positive light. So in short, while mischievous, naughty boys, they may suffer from stereotypes and face more frequent and harsher disciplinary actions, they're also at the same time tolerated, encouraged, and even celebrated in various subtle ways. So in that case, mischief can be reframed as a strength. However, I also want to mention that girls are not given the same level of tolerance or positive interpretation when it comes to mischief. Many teachers believe that when girls misbehave, it's even more serious than when boys do. This kind of judgment is built on a perception that boys are naturally more mischievous, or boys are naturally more obedient. So when a girl breaks this expectation, her behavior is more likely to be exaggerated or seen as unusual and unnatural. And when shown this image, so the original picture is like two boys playing on a playground. Most teachers responded with words like happiness and freedom. So for many of them, the photo symbolized joy, energy, and the natural spirit of being a boy. So some said that they hope boys stay mischievous and stay true to themselves. And many teachers also feel that in today's Chinese schools, in this context, rules and discipline have been pushed to an extreme, especially when parents they paid too much attention to students' performance and safety in school. The pressure on schools and teachers to manage and watch over the students will increase. And in this environment, some teachers start to worry that mischievous children, the naughty boy, especially the naughty boys, might lose their vitality. So encouraging students to challenge these strict disciplines and to express themselves more freely is often seen as something positive. And in this sense, the image of the playful boy becomes a symbol of resistance. But at the same time, I think this kind of reflection still stays within a relatively safe space, which is protected by traditional mindsets of masculinity. Because the image of the naughty boy is still a static stereotype, it still matches the long-standing public image of what a boy should be like. So when teachers say boys should be more free or less obedient, it's hard to tell, is this really about supporting all children to be true to themselves, or is it a celebration of traditional masculine traits like boldness and risk-taking? Okay, so that's about the naughty boy. And then the clever boy. So I realized that most of my participants, they still rely on the idea of gendered subject strength. So boys are naturally believed to be better at science and math, girls are more suited to language and the art subjects. And according to this view, boys are described as more rational, open-minded, and capable of flexible thinking. So they're seen as good at grasping overall structures, interacting confidently with teachers, and applying knowledge in practical ways. Girls are often seen as more detail-oriented, emotionally sensitive, hardworking, and diligent. In terms of how teachers interpret those differences, we have a quite typical example here. So Ms. Chu mentioned that some girls, you look at them and they seem to be very diligent. They've got all the materials, they've done everything, but then they still can't outperform the careless, disorganized boys. And then she laughed. It's kind of funny, she said. Some girls are just fake learners. They pretend to be obedient and hardworking, but they're not thinking. Some boys have terrible study habits, but once they decided to learn, they do it in their own ways, and they're actually very efficient. So from this quote, we can see that by downplaying the impact of boys' carelessness and even laughing about it, she subtly devalues what is usually considered a strength of girls, like being thorough and hardworking. And more importantly, she draws a sharp contrast between two learning styles. The girls are portrayed as passive, simply following instructions of teachers without independent thinking. And the boys are active and strategic, maybe messy, but seems to be more talented. And to explain these perceived learning differences, some teachers believe that it's because of differences in brain structures, again, brain structures, and they use terms like innate or genetic factors. While others again explain that this is because of boys' late development. Many of them mention that boys' slower physical and cognitive development during primary and maybe junior high school stage, which is year 7 to year 9 in China. This later development leads to a gap in academic performances, and this delay was said to affect their exam results. But most importantly, many teachers believe that once boys enter senior high school and their development catches up, their academic performance will improve significantly. which is, I think it's quite similar to what we discussed in previous theme about naughty boy, about they will be mature, they will naturally grow up when they enter senior high school stage. And the idea that boys have more potential in later stages of education appeared repeatedly in the interviews. So I think it was not just that boys would catch up, it was that they were expected to eventually surpass girls, especially in a higher level or more abstract learning context. And also we have quotes like, when students go to high school and the difficulty level of the content increases, the need for being detail-oriented become less important. And I feel that boys tend to perform better. And also there are some comments or judgments about the style of the examinations, especially the college entrance examinations. So there were comments like, in the past, the college entrance examination had a higher level of difficulty. It was more focused on intelligence-based challenges. So I think boys had a bit of advantage back in the old days. So these sayings, according to this statement, the later stages of education, especially senior high school, are seen as requiring more advanced thinking and deeper knowledge and stronger logical reasoning skills. By contrast, the earlier stages of education are associated with lower level content and fewer opportunities for critical thinking. So finally, as a result, girls, who are often seen as excelling in the early years due to their careful, diligent approach to learning, are framed as strong performance only in the easier phase of schooling. And these qualities of being thorough and hardworking are now redefined as less relevant or less valuable when the academic demands increase. And although these arguments are framed around boys' later development and seems to just explain boys' delayed realization of their potential, the actual effect is to create a value hierarchy that places boys as superior and central, where girls as subordinate and peripheral. Okay, so the third theme is about the weak boy. And I think the discussion of weak boy among my participants, it's the one that most closely aligns with the idea of boy crisis discussed by the scholars. So almost all the teachers I interviewed agree that boys' physical health is declining. They have more bone fractures and knee injuries today. And also, in terms of sports performance, many teachers said that boys today fall short compared to previous generations. And this decline in physical strength has sparked particular concern. It's not just because of the health issue, but because physical ability and athleticism are traditionally seen as key parts of ideal masculinity. So when boys appear physically weaker, it often triggers a deeper cultural anxiety. And images related to physical training, like here the military training or groups running on the school track. Well, the original photo is boys running on the school track. And these pictures often triggered very positive reactions from the teachers I interviewed. And many saw these scenes as symbols of ideal masculinity. And some teachers believe that military training reflects national defense values, and they praise the physical disciplines it promotes. And they said it helps students to develop a sense of endurance and toughness, which is something they feel that is seriously lacking among today's youth. And also on a psychological level, many teachers also commented that boys today seem more emotionally fragile than in the past. Especially compared to previous generations, they're seen as more easily to be upset, more anxious, and more likely to worry over relatively trivial things. And so here's this typical fault. Like, I feel like the boys I taught 10 years ago had more of that masculine toughness, or you could say a kind of strength. Boys today tend to be more timid and even somewhat feminized. So this is from a male teacher. According to him, the masculinity of a decade ago represents the ideal image of young man, just like brave, tough, broad-minded, and emotionally restrained. These qualities are remembered with nostalgia. At the same time, boys who seem softer, more hesitant, or more emotionally sensitive today are often seen as lacking masculinity. and teachers sometimes describe them as having taken on what they call female traits. So, well, I want to mention that there's also an interesting thing about how this anxiety about boys becoming feminine is not mirrored by rejection of girls becoming masculine. So in fact, teachers openly praise the rise of what we call tough girls, or in Chinese, the direct translation should be a female man. Those who are assertive, emotionally resilient, and physically strong, those girls are praised. These see fewer girls acting fragile today, and more girls showing determination and grit. And so qualities like bravery and toughness are defined as masculine traits, or being sensitive and emotionally fragile is defined as feminine traits. And these create, again, a clear hierarchy. When girls are praised for being tough, they're often admired precisely because they are seen as more like boys. And this praise is built on a subtle but powerful logic. Moving closer to masculinity is considered a kind of upgrade, a step from weakness to strength, from deficiency to excellence. And that's why boys who show emotional vulnerability or hesitation are often said to be feminine, as if they've lost something essential to being male. And teachers' descriptions of students' leaders also tend to reinforce the gender stereotypes. For example, all the top students, the ones doing well and becoming class leaders, class cadres, most of them are girls. Society is really upside down now. So the word upside down reveals a striking level of gender bias. It implies that girls dominating academics and leadership roles is not just surprising, it's unnatural, even wrong. Well, most teachers do acknowledge the progress of girls, even including this exactly teacher said, well, it's an upside down. She actually supports girls' progress. But actually, her opinion also reflects a common underlying sentiment among all the teachers, which is it's fine for girls to do well, to improve themselves, as long as boys do better than them. Okay, so the final theme I would like to share with you is about the charming boy. The physical appearance of boys also play a key role in how the ideal boy is imagined. And during the picture session, two photos of boy bands sparked a great deal of discussion among participants. So it's mainly about how the appearance and kind of masculinity they were seem to represent. This really interesting quote here. I interviewed a retired teacher. Her comment on a boy band called TF Boys is like, so this is the TF Boys. Our students were all fans of them. Otherwise, how could I even know TF Boys? And even my 96-year-old mom says, oh, they look so clean. Whose kids are these? So fair-skinned, so well-behaved. It might not say they're super masculine or full of manly energy, but they're neat, fresh, youthful, and attractive. So this comment reflects a kind of hierarchy again of ideal male appearance. Although she said that they are not super masculine, she still expressed clear approval of the TF boys image, saying that they're clean, tidy, and youthful and student-like. So what we see here is not a complete rejection of non-masculine male images, but a kind of negotiated acceptance. Even as teachers nostalgically recall a time when boys used to be taller and stronger, as we've mentioned in the weak boy theme, they also find space to appreciate this newer and softer model of masculinity. I think this softer male image is not characterized by physical power or dominance, but for being more socially non-threatening and aesthetically pleasing. And this aesthetic taste is partly influenced by the prevalence of androgynous pop stars, male idols, and also based on the recognition of mild and harmless image for underage students within the school environment. And when it comes to evaluating boys' appearance and demeanor, the term looking like a student-like style kept coming up. This idea of student-like image is built almost entirely on strict adherence to school rules of appearance. For some teachers, being a student is like having a job. The school uniform is like work uniform. And dressing the same way and following the same standards set in the schools of appearance is a key factor to fitting into the group. So in this context, the emphasis on students' identity becomes basic and most important rules that goes beyond gender. For example, many teachers, when they're commenting on their students' look, appearance, about whether they should wear makeup, whether they're tidy or not, just want to mention that wearing makeup is not allowed in Chinese schools. And when they're concerned about these issues, they're less complaining about whether the appearance aligns with gender norms. Their first reaction is always to say that this doesn't look like a student. Okay, so right after the expectation about boys should look like students, another major standard that appeared in teachers' evaluations was the deeply gendered binary of masculine versus feminine aesthetics. As mentioned earlier, some teachers did appreciate the clean and fresh look of the male idols, like the TF boys, but this approval was kind of limited. For example, exactly the same teacher, the retired teacher who praised for the student-like style of TF boys, she criticized, she felt uncomfortable for the certain picture I presented to her like this, because she said the boys are holding flowers in their mouths. So this is seen to be feminine to her. And also many teachers strongly rejected the style of another boy band, the second one here. And in the original photo, the boy band is clearly wearing makeup and they're promoting luxury bags. And teachers labeled them as little fresh meat, which is a term in Chinese that often used for describing young male idols with a so-called feminine beauty. And some even went further to use the word like a little white face to describe those boys. And in Chinese slang, this refers to a good-looking young man who is overly concerned with his appearance and possibly flirtatious or lazy and even dependent on women for financial support. This is what carries even deeper cultural insult, not just because of questioning the masculinity issue, but also because it implies that this man has failed to live up to traditional expectation of masculinity, being responsible, in control, and independent. And also the final bit I want to mention about what has also been mentioned in the Charming Boy session is about the standards expectations set for girls' appearance. So this rule of looking like a student still applies in girls' situation. They're also expected to be clean, neat, and avoid wearing makeup. But the different thing is that girls are not required to reject masculine aesthetics. And importantly, the rule against makeup seems to be temporary because many teachers, they're acceptable to imagine seeing where in the future context, when the girl really grow up, it's okay for them to wear makeup. Like they will imagine the scene of attending a ball or wedding. So they express approval when girls begin to dress up and wear makeup when they grow up. But when girls do wear makeup as a student, it's not just about breaking school rules, it's often related to moral issue. So just like the quote here says, why should a minor decorate herself? Is a natural beauty the most beautiful? And so this teacher also continues to mention about a former student, one of her previous students. The girl was from a very ordinary background, but after graduation, she started posting photos on social media and showing off her designer products and a luxurious lifestyle. And she is always wearing heavy makeup. So this teacher openly questioned whether this girl had achieved this life in a morally proper way. So here, makeup is interpreted not just as vanity, but also a sign of impurity. And in this discourse, natural appearance becomes a symbol of a moral integrity. And to be clean is not just about hygiene or neatness, it's about being innocent and pure. Okay, so basically, that's all the themes from my findings that I would like to share with you. So I think from those findings, I realized that this gender stereotype is still quite widespread, and the discourse of boy crisis, which is supported by those stereotypes, influence not only boys, but also girls and even teachers. However, teachers' attitudes, I think, have not yet reached the stage that is quite associated with post-feminist thinking, which is what has been discussed mostly in Western countries, like the saying of women have already succeeded, they have already achieved a lot. Now it's time to worry about boys. I think my participants, most of them, they haven't reached that stage. They remain at an earlier stage, saying that believing that boys and girls they have their traditional, distinct gender strengths. And I do realize that teachers recognize the importance of promoting gender equality in education, and they indeed claim to support gender equality. But things could be a bit different when how this understanding was applied to real educational settings. Okay, so that's all from me today. And yeah, thank you so much for listening. And I think now it's time for probably any questions if you have. And yeah, I'll stop sharing here. Um, okay,
Fabulous. Thank you
thank you.
very, very much for that. Yeah, you covered a lot of ground, and it was interesting, fascinating to see, in a way, how those stereotypes come through so clearly in your data. So just to say that the floor is now open. Questions and comments are welcome. While people gather their thoughts quickly, I was just wondering if you could say something about the composition of your sample, and if you could see any kind of, well, particularly gendered differences in I guess, the stereotypes or the sort of internalization of kind of gendered norms between, let's say, men and women or across your sample. Were there any obvious patterns there?
I think so. I've tried to find more male teachers this time, but the thing is, it actually reflects what the teacher told me. There are fewer male teachers in primary and secondary school stage. And so basically from all the 22 teachers I found, there were only like 3 male teachers I got. So I think it's a little bit hard to find a real pattern with
Yeah,
those
yeah.
limited numbers of male teachers here. But I think it's for the male teachers I interviewed, these seems to be more. One thing is they probably it was it was support boys. They were more supporting the sayings of boys being the victims of their education, and they feel pitiful for boys who are restricted, who are disciplined, and always sitting steadily during the breaks, and they just feel like it's a wrong situation. It's that's so these set them they claim that they themselves would encourage boys to be a little bit it's okay for them to be not that obedient. And another issue is that I remember that one male teacher, he actually is also a really typical example or kind of representation, just like many male teachers I have experienced during my time as a student. He was always trying to emphasize that he has critical and even revolutionary ideas. And he kept saying things like, I feel like it's wrong that when the whole educational environment is dominated by this feminine style, people, including male teachers and boys, they will lose their vitality, they will lose their this possibility of having critical thinkings. So I think it's not just like a stereotypical and even discriminative commenting on girls and female teachers. He also actually mentioned some examples of how he said he supported his daughter to wear makeup as long as not in a school context, but his wife, as the mother figure, just completely reject their daughter to wear any makeup or do anything against the school rules. And I think he didn't use that as example of proving his creativity or his rebellion, but I think it could kind of answer or echoes to some of his mindset. And I think that's quite really interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. And of course, there's that always that balance in between looking at people's individual positions and, again, not essentializing teachers into two groups or however that works, but thinking about how that works. So feel free to raise a hand digitally on camera, or if you don't want to ask your question out loud because this is being recorded, by all means ask it in the chat. But We do encourage questions. Hi, Zhao, by the way. Haven't seen you in a while. I hope you're well. I can see you on camera.
Hello, I can see.
Yuhan,
Yeah.
hi.
Yeah, hi. Very interesting topic, and I was shocked about your findings because all the things it's like a lot of them I've been heard when I grow up, even now. And I was shocked in Beijing as a capital city. I mean, the most developed cities, one of them, are still exist. And I'm curious, the teachers you find are all in like public, senior, and junior schools. And how about their gender and age? I mean, the participants' overall background, because like some of my friends are already in schools now, especially like female teachers, they try to encourage girls more like the post feminine position to balance the gender things in the class. So I was curious about the participants' overall background, like the age, gender, and I don't know.
Yeah, so thank you so much for the question. And so most of the participants are female teachers, and I only got one retired teacher and one teacher who just started her career like for 1 month. And all the rest participants, they have been in the profession for I think from 7 to 20 years. That's basically the range. So most of them they have much experience of teaching. And so I think just as I mentioned, because they are from Beijing and they definitely said that they support gender equality. And especially during the teaching, some of them even said that I don't think gender is really important factor. I will just treat every student as an individual student, treat them with their different traits. But what I found is that although some teachers they're really experienced, or I should say most of them are really experienced. They have more than 10 years of teaching experience. Sometimes they're still influenced by the gender stereotypes, and sometimes they're unaware of these things. And it's just kind of reflected in the word choices or this tiny, subtle little differences when they talk about boys and girls.
Yeah. Because from the funding side, I don't know, maybe it's personal feeling. The results shows the participants has the unconscious, maybe manipulate for girls to some extent.
Yes. And I think there's certainly. Oh, I don't know if you're just mentioning about that word choice of like upside down. I really feel that word is really discriminative. But that teacher, she is teaching in a migrant children's school. So basically, all the children, all the students, their parents are migrant workers, which means that their background, their context will be a little bit different from the rest of the students taught by my participants. So I think for her case, the thing is there's really contradictory stance for the teacher. Because for girls, especially for girls coming from those kind of families, they're suffering more from um, this culture of preferring sons over daughters. And she even mentioned that some of the female students she taught, they had to drop out early and get married early just because the family, the parents asked them to do so. So this kind of situation is still quite serious in some families. And this certain teacher who said upside down, she felt pitiful for those girls. But still, you can see from her language that sometimes she's still expressing this gender discriminative concepts to the students. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Xiao, you're next.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been a long time without to see you, cause yeah, hi Richard, I miss you. Anyway, thank you very much for all very fantastic presentation. I really like your research about gender in China. Yes, there's one question for you for I think this go beyond. It is going beyond your study from now on. Like you've got me 4 types of the boy in China in primary and secondary school in Beijing. Yes,
Mhm.
I want to know more about if you have like in political discourse in your research. Did you find some of items in our policies related to the gender issues and or the gender education in the primary or secondary school? Because I'm studying in early years. I mean the early childhood education and care in Beijing and China. So from my perspective, the lots of regulations or laws in ECE, I mean early childhood education, there is poor consideration about the gender things. What about
Yeah.
your funding in policies?
Well, thank you so much for the question. I did have a certain, I should say, a sub-theme or a tiny theme of a policy, but the thing is, it's quite depicted in a subtle and indirect way. So all of the policies mentioned by my participants are not directly related to gender. It's just like in a very indirect way of how it will indirectly influence for example, the academic performance of boys and girls. For example, I've just finished that chapter. The first thing they mention about is the examination policies, about how I don't know if you know, there are lots of changing reforms of the Gaokao system, about how they change the mandatory and compulsory subjects in the college entrance examination. And that's how teachers believe that these will affect boys and girls' academic performance, their final results. Because I remember that nowadays there's no direct distinction between the arts and science subjects. And students, they can choose the optional 6 courses according to their own situations. But for the senior high school entrance examination, the Zhongkao system, now physics has been redefined as one of the mandatory and compulsory subjects. And that seems to be that will benefit boys, according to most of my participants. They believe that in that case, the mathematics and physics, that will be the 2 main science-related subjects in all of the 4 subjects. So that would be a good sign for the boys. But at the same time, there's a changing direction of how the tests, how the questions are designed in examinations. The word limit, the description of a problem is much longer than in the old days, and questions are hidden in really long description of real life settings. So that seems to be a challenge for boys who traditionally believed to be less capable of doing this verbal understanding, verbal writing things. And that seems to prefer or favor girls' situation. That's how my participants feels like the policy is doing this balance between the gendered strength and the shortcomings. That's the first thing. And the second thing is also is indirectly related to the weak boy discourse about the physical education. Like I mentioned about, there's one proposal about preventing feminization of boys. And that's how some participant told me that currently the Chinese policies, educational policies, they have greater emphasis on physical education, about how the score of the PE test has been, the weight of it has been an increase in recent years, and that shows how the government is directing parents and society to help promote students, children's their healthy issue, and to especially how different sets of sports programs were set for the testing, because every students, they could have different development situations, especially during primary and junior high school stage. There could be this developmental differences between boys and girls. So if you set a quite similar standards, we're using the quite similar testing programs, then it could be unfair. So that's how many participants told me that now the policies, they are trying to conquer this inequality through the reformation of physical education tests. So I found that all of these answers are really, how to say, just subtly linked to gender, but not directly. And yeah, I think that's because the one thing is that there is indeed a lack of attention about gender from the governmental and political side. And another thing is that I remember one of my participants, she's been teaching in middle school for 20 years, and she felt like, oh, because I'm in Beijing, I feel like there is no such serious problem about gender equality issue. We have already reached a stage that boys and girls, they are quite a good match, and there's no such serious situations of girls or boys being discriminated. So she doesn't feel like it's a problem. So there's like it's unnecessary for any political intervention to change the current situation. And I think that kind of represents some of teachers' feelings. They feel like the so-called crisis or problems, difficulties, and situations could be temporary, or it could be something that can be changed after Reformation. So that's why most of them don't feel like a political intervention is really necessary. So that's why my theme about policy is just it cannot form a complete theme, just like in the naughty boy or clever boy section, because it's just not the key understanding perspective from my participants. Okay, that's what I got from my findings.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for
Yes.
the question.
Yeah, thank you. Lalit, hi.
Hi, Richard.
Hi.
Hi, Xiao. Hi, everyone. I'm also happy to see you today. So I have a question. So first I will explain a little bit. So all this, the topic is really very interesting. I liked it a lot. And all the issues that were just mentioned in the presentation, they are not new for me. We have these issues in our country too. So what I wanted to say, in our country, we have such kind of like debate or discussions about attracting male teachers to schools, because the number of male teachers at schools is really very low. And people think that not only like ordinary, like let's say people, but also like education experts, they think that it's a very, very big problem for schools, because in our country, the upbringing, the manners, just behavior of like children, both girls and boys, is like like men, like fathers are responsible for it mostly. And that's why they think that the cases of misbehavior at school and all the problems related to behavior at school, so they occur because of like this male teachers, because we have the lack of male teachers. And even they think that they want to like to set some special offers for male teachers, for example, like higher salaries than for female teachers, or maybe some special conditions in order to attract them to schools. I think that it's really very unfair to like women teachers, because I understand it's patriarchal country, but and it still is very unfair. So what I wanted to ask, so do you have this problem in your country? Do you have such kind of actions, let's say, offers in your policy for special for like male teachers?
Yes, thank you for the question. And I think, yes, it's not particularly mentioned during the interviews, but as far as I know, I've seen those news reports in China about how the standards for recruiting male teachers are a bit lower than recruiting female teachers. And I also think it's really unfair. And I think the thing is, what I've got from my participants, that the way they interpret this imbalance of gender ratio in teaching profession is mainly it's still influenced by the gender stereotypes and this traditional gender labor division, or this gender roles set for men and women. So at the same time, on one hand, they believe that students, especially boys, they need this male role models. Their behavior, everything has to be guided by a male teacher or father. But at the same time, they still feel like teacher is something like shouldering the caregiving responsibilities. The teachers need to be attentive, need to be careful, kind, patient. And in that terms, those qualities are more associated with women. So that's why from the very beginning, when the teachers, when the university students, when they're thinking about their career choices, they're influencing by these gendered concepts. And that's why many of my participants mentioned about they became male teachers told me that they became teacher just because they have this special teacher training university and schools in China, and it's cheaper than other universities. So this male teacher, he was coming from a economically disadvantaged family. So he became a teacher just because of economic issues. He didn't want to do that. He believed that it's too soft job for a man. So I think what Chinese government is doing is actually just to encouraging more male university students to join in the career by, for example, lowering the standards and giving them special offers, or also you can see that in the leadership roles, they're more male than female. I think this also seems to be something that could be attraction to male teachers. Some of them told me that they feel like they won't stay at the current position for a very long time. They would finally go to teaching in higher grades or just to become one of the leadership roles. And yeah, I think this is something that cannot be solved by merely setting different standards for recruiting male and female teachers. I think it's still originated from the cultural understanding. And if the cultural understanding, the cultural gender stereotypes are still prevalent, this unfair treatment to male and female teachers cannot really solve the problem, and will only just trigger more probably conflicts even between male and female teachers. Yeah, that's what I discovered from my context.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Unless somebody else raises a hand, I'm going to ask another question, which kind of in a way, I'm watching out for hands. If I can't see one, I'll go. I have a question, or in a way, two related questions, which come back to your contribution to knowledge, which of course is kind of the central point of the PhD. One is around, you've probably seen that particularly in the English-speaking media, but also in kind of policy circles, there are major concerns around a backlash against feminism, which you talked about earlier, and the kind of the rise of particularly toxic forms of masculinity, you know, Andrew Tate and these kinds of things. Is that kind of discourse also present in China, is one part. And the second part is, one of the things that you outline is that obviously the gendered and social dynamics in China are particular to China. But a lot of the things you're talking about, we can recognize here too in the literature and elsewhere. I guess in terms of your contribution, what's particularly Chinese, but what do you have in common with other contexts, in a sense? Do those two questions make sense?
Yeah, okay, good. Thank you. Thank you so much for the question. And I think these backlash against feminism, this so-called post-feminist thinking, can be observed in China, but not that prevalent, not that obvious as in Western countries. Because I thought I have this one pilot study, and also my master study was also related to the work crisis discussion. And I found that sometimes it depends on the teachers group. So my first batch of participants, some of them, they have a more some understanding quite similar to the backlash against feminism, saying that, well, blaming the female teachers or blaming that girls are outperforming boys is something that victimizes boys. But in my current research with those 22 participants and teachers, I feel like it seems not as strong. It's not that strong in this batch of participants. So I think as I'm doing a qualitative study, it cannot be just treated as a representation of all the Chinese teachers. But what I found is that for some certain schools, probably the teachers, they were just still staying at a prior stage about feminism is good, definitely good. And boys and girls, they have different strengths. That's all. That's, well, what they believe in. But for probably some teachers who probably who are younger, male teachers, they may have these similar mindsets about backlash against feminism. So yeah, I think definitely it's here. But if we want to hear more about that kind of discussion, then probably it could be, yeah, it's just about future development or just implication things. There'll be more heated discussion about backlash against feminism on Chinese social media, but not among the teachers I interviewed. I think that's the case. And okay, the second question about what's the common thing between China and yeah, I think it's just because the progress of feminism benefit all women worldwide. So I think that's quite understandable that there is this definite this deconstruction of the previous male-centered discourse and the previous assumption about boys should always be the better group. So I think this phenomenon of seeing girls outperforming boys, seeing more female accident class cadres who seems to be even more responsible than boys, it definitely is something that's a challenge to many teachers' previous understandings. Yeah, I think that's the thing in common. And yeah, so the boy crisis, I think part of it is centering around this competition or combat between boys and girls. I think these parts could be quite similar. And the different thing is probably because it is around the masculinity crisis, about how Chinese teachers trying to compare the current nowadays boys with the last generation. I think that could be a bit like culturally based and relying on the context. So especially I think there could be this discussion about the healthy issue. The strong body represents a strong mentality, and that's something probably related to patriotism, about the figure of boys representing the image of China as the country, and that could be something different. That's the topic of about this modern Chinese goal of as an independent and like finding the old days glory. I don't know if it's okay to say that, but I think that's quite special for the Chinese context. Yeah, and yeah, that's my answer.
Yeah, okay, no, that's fascinating. And people have put in the comments, this has been a fascinating presentation. So again, on behalf of the department and everyone here, Yuhan, thank you so much for sharing such fascinating and really important work.
Thank you.
All the best with the rest of your PhD. So a round of applause very much from us to you. My final kind of act is to point out that we have another session coming up soon, in fact, next week. So the next online seminar is at the same time, 12:30, but on Wednesday, the 7th of May. And Dr. Liam Wrigley, sorry, will be talking about NEET youth education needs, hopes and aspirations. So again, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you particularly to you, Yuhan Wu, for presenting your fascinating doctoral research. And I wish everyone a fabulous day. Or you a fabulous
Richard.
evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.